Hi, I'm Hugo Villarreal, the creator of The Recording, a film about robots, retirement homes, and our upcoming dystopian future. In this video commentary, first we take a look at the film together. I'm going to be pausing and sharing tidbits throughout the video explaining the decisions I made. After that, we'll hop into Cinema 4D and After Effects, showcasing the process for the project. Finally, at the end of this commentary, I share briefly how the 3D experience differs from the standard film. The title of the recording is the first thing we see on screen, but if the viewer is attentive enough, they can also get a hint of the plot twist at the end, right there on the TV screen reflection. While we are here, I wanted to take a moment and talk about these items here. I based the TV set I based it off of my own. Right now on the screen, I'm sharing a photo of my own TV set that I used to base this model on. On the other side of this frame, we can see a little bit of the poster that robots made for the presidents. It's a little play on the eeriness of this future, of also how it's a little bit connected to our own. That technology is always here. We are here, always here is the full part of that message. But the first part is don't worry, and I found it a little bit ironic that it's gray. It's the only gray thing on the whole room as well. I added here another thing that rewards the viewer, an attentive viewer that is, with the element that when the robot enters the room, the old guy starts to be created, and this is reflected here on the reflection as well. I based the design of the robot on as I mentioned on the first submission, on the first report. Basically, the research said that the nursing home residents, liked around 1.20 meters tall, with a metallic silver body and a human-like features screen. So I basically took that and put my own spin on it, as well as my own face on it. On the model, I added a small camera at the top, and basically that's the narrative explanation of how it's recording everything as well. Throughout the video, we will find that the movements are very restrictive in both of the characters, of the human characters. In terms of location, that is because, as I'm going to be sharing on screen right now, basically use a phone application to record myself in a limited space, and those movements I made on the recording were translated to motion capture data. So the space I had while recording myself was very limited, and that got translated onto the animation as well. This application is called Moves and is made by Cinemas 4D's developer Maxon. So it works natively on Cinema 4D, and it was pretty easy to import. Even after the motion capture was done, it was pretty easy for me as well to edit individual joints. For example, this direction Jamie is facing right now, facing his dad, I was able to polish it a little bit further natively on Cinema 4D. On this part of the video, Jamie and his dad are talking about how there's no one working on the retirement home, and I added this part based on the research I made for this project as well. On some screenings I made with my friends and my family, they noticed, especially in the 3D experience, the glitchiness the characters had, and that's why I decided to keep that effect on the character models. Polygons are kind of glitching and are all over the place. Even though the Alex we see on screen right now on the film, it's also on the past. The reason he doesn't have that effect, he's explained on the narrative because he's the one recording the reason on behind the scenes was that the effect didn't work quite well on glass, which is the main part of the face. It didn't have that glitching effect, it was just cracked. So I figured that was giving the wrong message visually. So that's why he doesn't look that way, but still has the hologram effect. When I sent that video for feedback, one of the comments I received was that they wanted to see the old man's face. However, from the very beginning, my intention was to keep the face hidden from the camera, because in my opinion that makes the old guy much more relatable. You can have the face of any old person there and it wouldn't matter, it still works as a story. It's not a particular person that is going through this. It's a quite a lot of people going through this. Oh, one thing I haven't mentioned is the voices. What I basically did was to record everything in Adobe Audition software and basically play around with the pieces with some effects I found natively and just make them sound like different characters. So I did that 3 character voices. Another clear aspect I had from the very beginning was the constant camera movement. So I've always been a fan of one takes in films, and especially I felt in VR it needed to happen in one take, so no camera cuts. So the main thing to decide here was the movement of the camera. What I ended up doing was try to frame it at first in a way that they are friendly, but it's very clear as well that they will fight because one is on one end and one person is on the other end. As the camera comes closer, we, as the viewer, take the side of the father, and we can see the father even in kind of a video game format, a third person camera kind of way, where the enemy is the son. So that's also why it was important to me have this framing, because in this way we can relate more to the old person and we're basically taking physically his side. Going back at the viewer wanted to see the face of the father, for those very attentive viewers as well, they can see the face if they pay attention as well. That's why I decided to add that little photo at the background. Also to express that the son is the only one left on his life. As we're nearing the end and it's pretty clear that the characters are holograms, I wanted to have a little tease to the viewer, so that when we almost see the old man face, it disappears. And I found that also kind of works like a metaphor of the time always passing us by, and how the people we are starting to get close or we would want to get close to can just be gone when you least expect it. So that's why I decided also to not show the face at the end when the old man is disappearing. As we stop watching the recording, in this case being played by the hologram, the real world begins to be a little bit black and white to represent the lack of energy or lack of enjoyment, as well as a more somber state of mind. And even though the original plan was to make it fully black and white, when I changed the hair color of James, then I decided to make it just very much less saturated. The final comments of the robot represent one of my personal objectives at the start of the video about how I feel we don't record enough for ourselves and for cherishing the time we have with our families. Also, it's a comment on how everything with the digital age is not our property anymore. So, for example, our photos, our recordings, when we upload them to to the internet, we are giving away that ownership as well. Also, in the context of this project, I believe the robot, if it was human, could bend the rules a little bit and show compassion to the sun, but it's really not programmed to do so. Finally, after the narrative concludes, I added a little bit of data for the viewer to reflect upon. Basically, this data shows how this project narrative came to be. Okay, now let's take a look at Cinema 4D. Let me open up the file. Here it is. And let's look at the eagle eye view. I'm not sure if that's the right name, but you can see the layout of the room pretty easily from here. I try to stay away as possible from very messy layouts because if I wanted to change something, I wouldn't find it if I had a lot of mess. So looking at the right side, the file items, you can see there's the cameras, the characters, environment, and I tried to be as organized as possible. And the first thing I wanted to show was how I made the 3D experience. It was a pretty smooth experience. Basically, what I did was duplicate the normal camera that I had and convert it into another object type. In this case, it was the 3D spherical, the stereo spherical type, object type. And from there, it was just a matter of playing a little bit with the angle of view. And for the separation, I noticed, based on my research, that is around 6 inches. Although this didn't have any units, I just typed 6 and it worked on my testing. So that was pretty good. The type of devices used is called the Destech B5. It's based on the Google Cardboard. I'm not sure if this setup will work on other equipments or any other devices. Okay, let's see what else is in here. For the bed, I think that's probably the one of the more complex objects in the scene. I played around with the fabric cloth simulator and with the colliders, and here you can see, if you take a look behind the scene, that I didn't quite I wasn't brave enough to play around it with the floor as well, so I ended up doing a little bit of trickery of just clipping the cover for the bed. For the rest of the objects, how I did them was very simple. Since I'm not an expert on Cinema 4D, I basically used a lot of simple objects, the functions or tools available here. I use a tool called Boolean, I'm not sure of the correct wording, that basically subtracts the elements from one another. I also used a lot of volume measures and volume builders, for example, for the controller, for the hair on the characters, and so on. And I figured that the main thing that saved this project was to use Redshift native materials. From my opinion, they looked beautiful and they quite lifted up the visual appeal for this project. As you can see from the outside, there are a lot of clipping objects. Also for the pillow, I used another great tool that it's called the brush, and it helped me quite a bit to just model a little bit of those items as well as the characters. Okay, so here is the brush. Okay, so what else? You can see also on the objects the two types of skeleton systems or joints I used. So the ones from games past, the ones in the recording are based on Maxon app, and the one from the future is the one I made myself for just keyframes animation. The joint system was a little bit of a hustle because first I made the all of the joints myself on the character models, which can be found on their own objects, the own Cinema 4D files, and then when tried to combine it to the Maxon motion capture, I ended up just removing everything that I did myself and binding them as they were on the motion capture. So even though it's not a very good practice to do so, I modeled the characters to fit the motion capture. And of course, even in this very tiny setting, there was quite some time I spent working on the shadows for the fans, which are in the end never seen on the film. So yeah, there are some things I could have spent less time on. Okay, moving on to After Effects. Let me show you how the file is set up. Basically, I have three main compositions: the recording final, the recording 3D, and the recording just plain recording. So the plain one basically is without the references, and that's where I made most of the edits. And the final one just have a little bit of extra intro and extra outro slides taken from the keynote presentation I made. Moving on to the main edit, you can see that I mostly did sound mixing here. A lot of just small adjustments like sharpen, adding Gaussian blur, the edges, having the color adjustments and so on. But the main animation is basically just a PNG image sequence directly rendered from Cinema 4D that can be found here on the composition name main footage. Another part of the process that I thought it would be much harder than it really was the After Effects edits for that 3D section. And basically I just used two green squares to just place the elements. The first thing we can see here is the countdown. When I did some testing, I found out that some users struggle quite a bit setting up the VR goggles. So I added that little countdown at the start to ease that process and hopefully make the experience a little bit less stressful for those users. Another big thing I edited because of some testings were the titles. I made them much smaller comparatively to the standard film because I found out that as they were a little bit smaller, it read a little bit better. The final big adjustment for the 3D experience was the holographic effect. Basically, I made the whole thing flicker instead of just the characters. I felt that was more visually appealing when you are experiencing this film as a VR experience, because it's kind of a meta commentary and meta experience of this hologram, this experience glitching as you as well. Also, on an early draft, the idea was that James also had VR goggles. So in a way, I felt this adjustment really works in VR. Okay, so this marks the end of this video commentary. Thanks for watching all the way through. Even though this is a very heavy topic, I hope that this film helps us make a little bit more time with our families and make us remember to take better decisions for our loved ones. Thanks again,